Good afternoon, y'all. I am Aja Taylor. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Advocacy Director at Bread for the City, and so excited for you all joining us for this conversation, this Breaking Bread. As you know, Breaking Bread is a conversation series that we've started at Bread for the City to really bring our other supporters, donors, just folks in our community deeper into our work and deeper into our politics, really the politics around why we do the work we do and why we take the positions we take. And today we'll be talking about closing the racial wealth gap. If you are here for that conversation, you are in the right place. I'm going to give each of our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. We are going to have a really dope conversation today, and we're going to dive right in. So Temi, why don't you kick us off with an intro?
Okay, thank you, Aja. Happy to be here. Hey, everybody, my name is Temi Bennett. I am the co-CEO of IF, a foundation for radical possibility. We are a private racial justice foundation centering Blackness in DC, and we fund in the region.
Awesome. Brittany, you down to go next?
Absolutely. Thanks, Aja. Hey, everyone. My name is Brittany Pope, and I'm the Economic Security Supervisor at Bread for the City. I head up the Economic Security Program at Bread, which focuses on coordinating, supporting, implementing, and advocating for guaranteed income projects and policy change. I'm committed to this work because being born and raised in DC, I believe in uplifting my community, especially those who have been historically marginalized, and just striving for a just society for all. So thanks, y'all. So excited for this conversation.
Beautiful. Thanks, Brittany. Councilmember, you can round us out.
Thank you, Aja. Thank you to you and the team at Bread for the City for allowing me to be a part of this illustrious panel. I look forward to hearing from my co-panelists, but also want to let folks know I am a council member, I'm a large council member in DC. I've been on the council for more than a decade. Importantly, I'm also a fourth generation Washingtonian, born and raised right here in the District of Columbia. Really, I chair the Committee on Business and Economic Development, and part of what I've always prioritized as chair of this committee is trying to make the District of Columbia more racially equitable, more socially just, and more economically inclusive. So I look forward to this conversation today.
Beautiful. And it's Aja. I'm gonna let you slide on the one though, because I know you're not feeling well, but
appreciate you.
So our first question is actually for Temi. First of all, congratulations on being named co-CEO of IF. Quite a big deal. We don't necessarily believe at Bread, and I know y'all don't believe, that Black people should be sort of compared to white folks, right? Like white folks or whiteness is not the standard of achievement, but it does feel important to note the gap, right, in Black wealth and white wealth particularly. So the stat that we have is that white wealth is about 81 times that of Black wealth in the district. We'd love to hear from you just a little bit about how that came to be.
Yes. And so, Aja, I do want to just define wealth, right? So, and I'm going to use DC Council's Office of Racial Equity's definition. Wealth is made up of assets like dwellings, land, currency, deposits, stocks, minus liabilities like mortgages and consumer loans, right? And so, I'm just going to do a little bit of history because we don't have the time to go through everything, but like beginning, right, with 246 years of chattel slavery, followed by congressional mismanagement of the Freedmen's Savings Bank, which left 61,144 depositors with losses of nearly $3 million in 1874. Violent government-backed massacres like the decimation of Tulsa's Greenwood District in 1921, and the discriminatory policies throughout the 20th century, like Jim Crow era's Black Code, strictly limiting opportunity in many Southern states, the GI Bill, the New Deal's Fair Labor Standards Act, exemption of domestic agriculture and service occupations, which majority were Black folks, and redlining and related contract buying. The American government has extracted and prevented the accumulation of wealth and all the security, choice, and economic mobility that wealth enables in a capitalist society, right? And we're in a capitalist society, and the way that you advance in a capitalist society is through ownership of things and in the past of people, right? especially with this country. And so that's just like federal stuff, right? And that's just a few historical notes. But all of these federal discriminatory practices were mirrored at the local level, right? And so it is the 404 years of collective harm by federal, state, local governments, private industry, and individuals that have created the Black wealth gap that we see today.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And some other really important, I mean, the economist in me can't let us go on without noting the two biggest extractions of Black wealth. The first was the United States Department of Agriculture from Black farmers. And the second was actually in 2008, right, during the mortgage crisis, the two largest extractions of Black wealth. And so appreciate you really bringing up just how fragile even Black wealth can be, that white violence has historically been one of the main enemies of Black wealth. Really, Kenyan and Temi, before we get into this conversation about the wealth gap and kind of what are some of the things being used to address it, would love if you all could talk about the differences between universal basic income, or UBI, reparations, and direct cash giving, because we see those sometimes conflated. And Councilmember, why don't we start with you, and then Temi, move to you.
Well, I appreciate you deferring to me, but Temi is the expert here, and I appreciate Temi's perspective. And as a former staffer on our team, so I think the differences between universal basic income and programs like that, reparations, direct cash assistance, is really that. I mean, universal basic income is just that; it's universal. It is designed more as a cash giving program that addresses some of the clear and present poverty that exists in communities. We did something a couple of budget cycles ago that the mayor partnered with Martha's Table, to actually implement. I think when you think about the reparations conversations, traditionally centered around financial compensation to descendants of enslaved Africans, and I think it's broadened over the years, and it's still obviously a really rigorous debate, but it's broadened to include reparations for Black Americans wronged or traumatized by the ills of slavery, Jim Crow, and structural institutional racism, as Temi just articulated. I think direct cash assistance programs are extraordinarily important given the wide racial wealth gap that exists in the District of Columbia, one of the largest of any city in the United States. And so I do think that we have to make sure that we're doing more of these types of programs where there's demonstrable evidence that they work. And where there's evidence that they work, we should be trying to scale up to make those programs assist residents across the District of Columbia, which we have done in some cases. Like the direct cash assistance program we did, like the EITC program was a part of the budget increase a couple of years ago, and like baby bonds for that matter.
Yeah, and I mean, Councilmember McDuffie just explained it. We look at like direct cash giving is just a broader umbrella that UBI, guaranteed income, can fit under. UBI is to everybody, like Councilmember said. Some arguments is that it's just easily administratively, right? If everybody just gets this and then it's easy to do, but we don't believe, our organization, we don't believe that we should be giving money to people that are already wealthy, right? To people that don't need it. Guaranteed income is more of a, you can start targeting what you mean by the community and who's going to receive those benefits. We look at a guaranteed income as a poverty intervention strategy, not a wealth building strategy. It's to help folks that are already struggling, right? And so, and for us, when we say guaranteed income, and that's also why we did not we're not advocating in our guaranteed income pilot, our Let's Go DMV pilot, we use guaranteed income versus other terms like direct cash giving and universal income. But when we say guaranteed income, we mean a regular cash payment accessible to members of a specific community with no strings attached, right? Like no work requirements, no strings attached. That's how we're using that definition. And then when we say reparations, like Councilmember said, we're talking about repairing a harm specifically for descendants of enslaved Africans, right? And so in America, when I'm using that frame, that's how, when I say reparations, that's what I'm talking about. And so they're not interchangeable. People are conflating the two. They're very distinct. And a very specific example is that our guaranteed income pilot, there are non-Black people in it. Our guaranteed income pilot is not for just Black folks. That is not reparations for us, right? And our guaranteed income pilot is specifically for displaced restaurant workers in DC. And that is, it's Black folks, it's white folks, and it's Latino folks in that pilot group.
So I appreciate this. I appreciate that distinction that y'all made. Thank you. So then let's keep digging a little deeper. So as we think about what it will take to close the racial wealth gap, right? You all have talked about some solutions, some programs. Curious actually to hear from all of you. And so Brittany, why don't we start with you to get your voice in the space? What do you think it will take to close the racial wealth gap in DC? And if you want to speak to what do you think it'll take for us to begin talking about Black wealth without having to compare it or feeling like we need to compare it to white wealth?
Yeah, it's a great question and a big question. I won't take a crack at it. So I think that building and increasing generational wealth is one way. So echoing Temi's awesome historical breakdown earlier, the persistent racial wealth gap is not an accident at all, but the result of centuries of federal and state policies that have systemically disadvantaged Black Americans and their ability to build, maintain, and pass on wealth. But closing the wealth gap will need to go way beyond just, securing more money for Black families. We need to fix the policies. We need policies that will ensure that the structures supporting wealth creation deliver equitable outcomes. Bolstering the earned income tax credit, as the council member mentioned, the child tax credit is one way. And as the council member also mentioned, reparations could be a way of, and a method of increasing Black wealth. Bread for the City is specifically pro-reparations. Another method that is personal to me is student loan cancellation, student loan debt cancellation, and subsidizing higher education. It's hard to build wealth when you're saddled with debt at the beginning of your career. The ripple effects will continue on throughout your life and your family's life. So yeah, that's at the top of my mind on that question.
Beautiful.
Aja, can I chime in a little bit?
Yeah.
I appreciate Brittany's perspective there and agree wholeheartedly. But it really, from my perspective, and for the people in positions similar to mine as elected officials, it really takes an acknowledgement, first and foremost, of what we're dealing with here, right? And I think people tend to engage in these types of conversations about closing the racial wealth gap, and they instantly start pointing fingers, and they have a conversation that tends to make people recoil, right? You blame white people, you blame Black folks for whatever reason. And to me, it is not about blaming. It is about acknowledging what Temi already laid out, and we've all sort of agreed with, is the history that exists for Black people in this country. It is a history marked by intentional policies that were designed to exclude, that were designed to keep Black people from achieving wealth, to keep us from buying homes, to keep us from getting access to capital, to start businesses with traditional financial institutions, right? And so, it didn't happen overnight, and I think it's important for people to acknowledge, for people in my position to be intentional about what the problem is and why it's so important that we legislate to try to solve it. It is not going to happen overnight. It didn't occur overnight either, right? But it did occur intentionally, and it's going to take elected officials and others who care about this issue to be just as intentional and focused about the solutions that are going to close the wealth gap. Some things can happen urgently and quickly, but we have to recognize that it's going to take a while for us to start to chip away at this. But I wanted to just say, I think it begins with acknowledgement and a level of intentionality that heretofore we haven't seen across the board all the time.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because that is absolutely true. It was intentionally, right? This sort of racial wealth gap was intentional, right? That's what I've heard from both Brittany and the council member. And so it requires the same level of attention, the same level of intention in order to undo and correct. And yes, acknowledgement is the first step. Temi, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
I don't have anything to add to that. I completely agree. It's been happening and it's rooted in anti-Blackness. And so that's the only thing I would add. It's rooted in anti-Blackness. So even if we do these small things, unless we're going to stop anti-Blackness, right, then the system perpetuates itself.
Yes, agreed. Brittany, I would love if you could talk to us a little bit about where does Bread for the City fit in all of this? I know, yes, we support reparations, but what does that even mean? And what are we doing to combat the issue?
Yeah, so I want to go back to Bread's mission, which is to uproot racism, which is a major cause of poverty and this racial wealth gap. We help DC residents living with low income to develop the power to determine the future of their own communities. So we do this in a number of ways. One particular way that comes to mind is our workforce development program. And it focuses on providing credentialing programs to our consumers so they can advance in their careers, increase their incomes. Also with the creation of the economic security program that came out of the Thrive East of the River project. We're helping to coordinate and implement guaranteed income programs that have allowed the participants to add to their savings, their wealth, and to invest in their communities. We also work very closely with the DC Guaranteed Income Coalition. We're working to secure more funding for guaranteed income programs and to continue to minimize the benefits cliff effect through regulatory action and advocacy at the federal level.
Can you talk a little bit about what the benefits cliff is? Because that piece is actually really, really important.
Absolutely. So the benefit cliff effect happens when person or family's income increases due to receiving funds, direct cash from these guaranteed income programs. And in turn, it may harm or terminate or negatively impact their access to social safety net programs, whether it be SNAP, TANF, Medicaid. These programs, the guaranteed income direct cash programs, are meant to uplift and really help the participants. And the last thing we want to do is to harm their public benefits. So that is a big work of the Guaranteed Income Coalition and Bread, is to work with our council and federal programs to minimize the effects of the benefits cliff.
Thank you. So I want to turn us back to this question of reparations. So Councilmember McDuffie, you actually introduced Bill 24-48, which establishes a task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans, with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. Well, would love to hear more about what you're doing to pass this legislation, and why did you feel it was important in the first place?
Thank you for the question. I felt it was important for all the reasons that we've stated thus far this afternoon on this panel, because of the history of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, Black codes, intentional government sanctioned policies designed to keep Black folks from gaining wealth. I thought it was important to do it. I also think that we should note that we have been supported in our efforts by Bread for the City. I know the question earlier was, what could Bread for the City do? I would have probably framed it slightly differently. What more can they do? Because they've already done a lot in their efforts to close the racial wealth gap and to show up in spaces where decisions are being made, including in my office in the John A. Wilson building. I see George is on, and Brett was really instrumental in my crafting of the Racial Equity Achieves Results Act that ultimately was passed and funded by the council. that established the Council's Office on Racial Equity. I think we need a stronger Office of Racial Equity on the executive side to develop a tool to measure performance based on racial equity. But to get back to the specific racial equity, reparations bill that you mentioned, I'm going to reintroduce that bill. I think it's important to do that, and symbolically during Black History Month, to reintroduce the bill. And I'm going to ask folks to show up and testify once we have a hearing. We're going to work to try to schedule a hearing. We are internally thinking about a hearing sometime in June, and you can probably guess what date it's going to be close to in June. If we can pull it off. I know we've got an extraordinarily busy council schedule ahead of us, but this is an extraordinarily important issue. And although we introduced it last council period, we want to do more than just simply reintroduce it this council period. And I would call on everybody who can hear the sound of my voice. If you have ways for us to enhance the bill as introduced, if you have ways for us to have these types of conversations that really are designed to educate people as to the importance of racial equity and not designed to blame or point fingers or paint a picture that this is somehow going to disadvantage some group of people in the District of Columbia, because that's not what it's designed to do. So I appreciate the question, and I look forward to reintroducing that bill and hopefully getting some support and testimony from folks who are a part of this.
Will you let folks know where they'll be able to find a copy of the bill if they do want to provide comments or any of that?
Yeah, it shouldn't be difficult once we reintroduce it, because we're gonna promote it not only on our website but on on all our social media platforms. And what I will do, and I'm sure Donnie Crawford on my team is listening to this, is to make sure that we send a copy to organizations that have been partners in our efforts over the years, including some of the ones that are represented here today, to make sure that, and then obviously you can always get a copy of the bill at the DC Council's website, which is dccouncil. I think it's GOV now, dccouncil.gov. If you are savvy with how to operate LIMS, and frankly, if you're not, just call our office and we'll get you a copy. We'll figure out a way to, even if it's snail mail or just dropping it off to you all, we'll do that.
Wonderful. So I want to ask, kind of move into, so Councilmember McDuffie talked a bit about the government's role in this question of reparations and really in this question of closing the racial wealth gap. And Temi, I want to ask you, philanthropy has a long history of racism and anti-Blackness, and I would love to hear from you not only what you see as philanthropy's role in this reparations conversation, but also if you could talk to us about some of the things that you all are doing and exploring at IF.
Yeah, sure. So in our latest 2020 strategic plan, which is a 10-year strategic plan, previously, we never had a stance on reparations, and now we do have a stance on reparations. And for us, we believe that African Americans are owed reparations from government, but we also believe they're owed reparations from everybody, actually, right? Like whoever has extracted wealth from Black labor and Black genius are have a debt to be paid. And so our reparations, but we also want to acknowledge the glass house, right? So Councilmember McDuffie talked about people start pointing fingers. It's very easy to say government, right? And it is government, but it's also the sector, right? And philanthropy, and like our wealth is built off of anti-Blackness and hoarded, right? And then we give out a little percentage of that wealth in the interest of the good for charitable purposes, right? But it's also as a way to keep that wealth, which rooted in like this idea of perpetuality, like what is it? The concept of and perpetuity, right? Like that we should this philanthropic wealth should exist forever, and we're gonna give you a little bit, sprinkle a little bit every once in a while to get all these tax benefits to keep hoarding this wealth. And so our reparations project is an attempt to acknowledge this glass house, and we partnered with National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, so also known as NCRP. NCRP, for folks that don't know, in philanthropy is considered kind of like the watchdog of the sector. They are by and large considered objective, right? Watchdogs of the sector. And so we felt like we wanted credibility and the distance to not study ourselves and say, okay, this is how much we extracted and this is how much we're going to pay back. So giving it to a third party and letting them study our endowment and the endowments of, we're in this pilot, we're studying 9 foundations in the region. So who have either like are based here or have extracted and gotten their wealth here, right? Studying their endowments, their own history, and how their wealth originating from the individuals or the family or the corporation, whatever that entity is, and then quantifying how much harm was extracted from how much wealth was extracted from Black people, and then with the goal of them actually having a redress and paying that wealth back, right? And I'll tell you, like, we are committed to paying that wealth back. I'll tell you, the other foundations have not committed to doing that, but we're studying them anyway. And so that history will come out and will be published.
I love that. I can't wait for it. Can't wait to nerd out on that. Speaking of glass houses, right? I mean, Bread for the City, we're in a glass house ourselves. And so, Brittany, I'm curious if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, right? Like, we know nonprofits also exist because people are poor. I receive a check, you receive a check, we are able to sustain our organization based on grants that people give us because people do not have. And so would love to hear just a little bit from you about what you see as sort of nonprofits' role in this reparations conversation.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for acknowledging the fact that nonprofit organizations have benefited from the fact that Black people have been subjugated and oppressed. And we as nonprofits, we make money off of it. Yeah, Aja, you touched on this. Temi touched on it a little bit. So the question really is, how do we reconcile our role in upholding this wealth gap while also trying to dismantle it? It's a tricky place to be. Because ultimately we should be trying to work ourselves out of this job, right? But nonprofits really have the unique opportunity to disrupt the systems that perpetuate this racial wealth gap by centering work on racial equity and forging relationships with stakeholders in other sectors. So Bread is a member of the Anti-Racist DC campaign, and that's a 10-year campaign that aims to create a network of organizations and institutions from 8 different sectors. That's nonprofit world, government, education, business, philanthropy, labor, DC residents, and media. So nonprofits will be in a stronger position to address the racial wealth disparity in this country if we focus a little bit more on collaboration. We're stronger together, basically. We should work in conjunction with these other stakeholders, doing the work in coalitions, and not working in silos, which is so easy to fall into.
Yes, all that, yes. And also, like, a plug for nonprofits, if there was some centralized reparations fund that were to exist and people were paying into it, by people I don't mean like individuals, I mean like the government has a share and philanthropy has a share, nonprofits also should have a share, right? That we are, you know, an organization our size, right, $25 million ish, you know, what is also our financial responsibility to making sure that reparations happens? What is our financial, I don't want to say sacrifice, because, you know, but what does accountability look like for us too, as nonprofit folks? So as folks are reflecting on their role to close the racial wealth gap, what is one thing that folks who are on this call, we have almost 100 people on here, can do to close the racial wealth gap? There was a question I saw in the chat about, like, yeah, can people leave money in their will to this? But yeah, what is something that a person can do as an individual to address this issue? And this is for everybody, so whoever wants to hop in first.
I'll jump in. there's a lot of things that people can do, right? So one, you got to learn the history. You got to know what you're talking about, get informed on the issue. I think you got to develop an analysis on race. I think you can cut a check. I think you got to shift resources. And I think you can also leave Black folks alone. I'm specifically talking about the Black wealth gap, right? And so then like I'm gonna put a book list in the chat if you're trying to learn about the history of reparations, right? Like learn.
I'll jump in, but I think it's important to sort of continue to paint the picture and how stark the challenges are. When you think about sort of measures of success and ways that people build wealth in this country, you think about housing, you think about other things. Think about this: the average cost to buy a home in a district is somewhere around $640,000, right? The average rent for one bedroom is around $2,300. You think about the cost to send a child to college, right? You're talking about $35,000, $36,000, right? You think about the disparities that Temi started this conversation off with, that Aja mentioned, that white wealth is 81 times that of Black wealth. And even if it's just incomes, right? Because there are more people going to college, graduating college. Incomes are still much higher for white residents in DC than it are for Black residents in DC. I think it's 3 times as much. And so you take these sort of measures of success, you think about the negative things about how many Black people are arrested compared to other races in the District of Columbia. And you wonder, right? Or maybe you don't wonder why life expectancy for Black people in this country is consistently 5 to 7 years before white residents. I say all that to say, when we start having this conversation about reparations at the council, please try to help my team and I put things in context so that this is a conversation that is educational, designed to inform, but that moves the ball on these issues. We've talked about this stuff for far too long, and we have to be big and we have to be bold. One of the things that the reparations bill as drafted does is allow for contributions, donations. And I think we have to make sure that we are not relying solely on government to fix this problem, because the problem is indeed extraordinarily significant. And so I just wanted to make sure that I put that out there, and for folks who, and I know I'm to a certain extent preaching to the choir on this Zoom, but I think it's important that we are doing things designed to change the narrative about reparations so that it's not have the what I've seen is the sort of negative connotations associated with it.
Can I add, but Brittany, I want to let you go if you had something to say. I did want to add one more other point.
Go ahead, Temi.
I want to, and thank you, Councilmember McDuffie, but also thank you for the REACH Act and setting up, the Council Office on Racial Equity, because they have an amazing report they published a few years ago, and we'll put that in the chat too, because when we were getting, Councilmember got specific, when we're talking about DC specifically, right? And this is specific to this racial wealth gap study is specific to DC, and there are categories, and you can go and you can see what you can do, right? And what's relevant to you for your work and what's possible. And so some of those wealth building categories in this study are employment, quality employment, right? Income factors, workforce readiness factors, home ownership and living expenses factors, like Councilmember just talked about, financial assets, debt management, social networks, and and personal approaches to debt, right? Those are just big picture. And if you have an interest or you're in a role that can impact that, then that's where you should plug in.
Yeah, I love the idea of people getting in where they are and using what's already, it can feel like a very daunting, big, overwhelming problem. And it is, it's a huge thing. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And so figuring out what is your lane, what is your role, and how can you contribute from where you are. Brittany. And then we'll keep putting in, before you go, Brittany, y'all can keep putting questions. We have a few, but yeah, we'll move to audience questions after Brittany.
Thanks, Aja. I just want to echo everything that my amazing fellow panelists have how they've answered this question. One thing I think about in reflecting on this question of one thing people can do is I just go back to my initial thought of what is the vision of a perfect society, right? When you close your eyes and think about what would a just, good society look like, where people are taken care of, their needs are met. And when I close my eyes and think of that holistically, I think of so many things. I think of a lot of the things that Temi just mentioned, like fair housing, economic security, food security, safety in neighborhoods and community. And I'll do a quick plug for the economic security team's newest initiative. Has not come out yet. It's hot off the presses, but we're working on a project called Cash RX that it will be working with our medical patients at Bread for the City around the social determinants of health and how a cash infusion might improve their health outcomes. So thinking holistically, wealth means so many things. It's not just financial, but it's health, it's housing. And I think that one thing specifically that our community members can do is just like get involved. So if y'all are interested, I can drop the link to the DC Guaranteed Income Coalition meetings. We have them every third Thursday of the month. It's a great way to talk to organizations involved in this work and just your neighbors. We get out in the community and do public education. We go down to the Wilson building and talk to council members and the mayor. I think we're stronger together, basically. We are stronger together. So coalition work is big, and I think just jumping in and learning and getting involved is a great way to move forward with this work.
Can I say one quick thing?
Yes,
about,
go for it.
because I talked about the reparations bill, but over the last several years, particularly when the pandemic struck, my committee has done a number of things from GBI, a pilot, to the Commercial Property Acquisition Fund, to the Access to Capital Fund. And I recognize that the council operates in silos, as is the case for the executive in many instances. And so one of the things that I think people on this Zoom who are interested can do, I know a lot of you are already signing up to testify. You've probably been testifying at performance hearings, and you'll do the same for budget. But please help me advocate for us to eliminate the silos, to recognize how inextricably linked the work of the committees is to one another. For example, I chair business and economic development, but labor, right? And it is so tied to the work that I'm doing with business and economic development. If you think about public safety and the impacts it has on our future economic growth, and whether a person wants to own or run a business where there are lots of things that are happening around there, housing, right, is one of the foundational elements of wealth building. And as I think about things that I do to try to chip away at the racial wealth gap in the District of Columbia, I'm going to be collaborating more with my colleagues at the council. And I think that's one of the things that you all can give some thought to, how we can perhaps try to eliminate some of the silos that exist, so that we're talking across committees and partnering around some of these initiatives.
Yeah, I love those. And we have some audience questions. A thing that I'll add is that talking to your neighbors, talking to the people in your sphere of influence about this, this is being recorded and will be shared. You can be like, you have a watch party. You can be like, yeah, I was at this panel, seemed lit. Like, let's, get some drinks, look at it, and let's talk. Or let's get some popcorn, let's look at it and let's talk. Let's talk about this idea of reparations, especially if you're a person who is white or who is not Black. This question of reparations, which is very, very targeted racially, so much of the division that I think Councilmember McDuffie alluded to, I think Temi and Brittany alluded to it too, is this idea of like, oh, but if you do this stuff for Black people, other people will be left behind. And so having the conversation about why anti-Blackness and solving for anti-Blackness, historical anti-Blackness, is at the core of racial justice for all people is really, really critical. Cannot be understated how important it is to have conversations with your other non-Black folks in your sphere of influence. You know, it's not, Thanksgiving is a ways away, but you know, what would it mean to have those conversations be the ones that come up at our dinner tables, at our cookouts? Yeah. So we have some questions for the audience. The first one that I'm going to ask came from earlier. And it was this question of like, if in the conversation about reparations, is there attention being paid to the Post-Holocaust Financial Recompense Act and like how that worked as a mechanism to distribute funds to folks who are impacted by the Holocaust?
The short answer. Oh, go ahead, Temi. I'll let you. I'll just say the short answer for me is yes, but Temi, you want to win?
No, for sure. I was going to say yes. Like people are looking at the way that Germany did their reparations, and like even I was at a panel with this economist from Germany, and they polled, and I mean they said that like America, because of course at the time of reparations for Jewish folks after World War II, it wasn't popular with German populists, right? Like they didn't want it either, right? And right now we're at a time in America that Americans, more Americans want it than Germans did, white Germans did at the time that the government actually paid it. So I'm saying this to say we're at a place like Black folks have been fighting for reparations since we've been here, right? And since the end and abolition of enslavement. But we're in a moment where the American people are open and are acknowledging structural and systemic racism and acknowledging that there is a duty to repair and repay.
Thank y'all. So I actually wrote a paper that asked this same question for the Economic Policy Institute, but there's this question of, can a reparations program actually achieve its impact? I mean, and Ronnie asked, can it achieve its maximum impact? And I think I'd ask, can it achieve any impact at all, really, in a system of persistent racial capitalism, right? So in a system where, and I think the same, like, again, like as an economist who studies or has studied and continues to study the housing market, we can talk about all the ways that housing has never been a viable wealth building strategy under capitalism for Black people, and not as long as also white violence exists. I would love for folks to just speak to that. And speak to the nuance of that.
Of course, Ronnie asked that question. For me, no, right? Personally, no. But does that mean I don't want my check? No, I want my check, right? And I think that, to my earlier point, like if the system doesn't change and it's in a system in America is rooted, our system is rooted in anti-Blackness, then that extraction will happen, right? Like we have not always been there. There's in our history, there are moments of Black prosperity, and the system self-auto-corrected and extracted that from us, right? And so there is no reason to believe, unless we change that system, that won't happen again. And I mean, for me, I think the conversation is that, like, what is the next system? What can you actually do around, for me personally, I'm interested in cooperative economics. Like, what can we do collectively, right? And grow together. But what can you do when America's like, I don't think that Americans' capitalist society is going to change anytime soon, right? But does that mean that we stop fighting for these checks? No. And so, but what kind of counter structures can we create within this anti-Black capitalist society that can protect us? And like there are examples like Mondragon, right? Like that we can, I think Black people particularly can look to. Mondragon, if you don't know, is a corporation that they say that they're the human approach to capitalism, based in the Basque region of Spain. And it was created, the Basque people were oppressed by the Spanish people, right? So they are a minority, and their success was rooted and started in oppression. But what's unique about Mondragon is that like they actually had resources. The land that they were on was rich in resource. And so for us, we're not, even if we wanted to be anti-capitalist within this capitalist society, we can't do that without the resources. We're gonna have to start from somewhere. And reparations is one strategy, right? To get some resources into Black people, Black communities and Black hands.
Yeah, if I ever get cool enough to have a memoir, it's going to be called I Am an Anti-Capitalist, but I Still Want My Check, Though. Mixtape coming soon. So there's another question here. Councilmember Bonds, Jesus. Sacrilege.
I messed your name up earlier, so.
That's true. Yeah, Councilmember McDuffie. It's about the baby bonds. That's what had messed me up. A person wanted to know just more about like, how is that being implemented and how is that going?
Yeah, so we just had oversight this week. As a matter of fact, was it yesterday? I think yesterday. My days are all a blur. With the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, and it is being designed right now. They are, because it's so novel and there aren't really models to follow with how you implement this. We are the only jurisdiction, the district in Connecticut, to have passed these bills, and they delayed theirs. Our implementation has not been delayed; it's been funded to the tune of $32 million. The question is, how do you implement it? So the rules have been written. We had great testimony from a witness from the Urban Institute that raised some issues around the rules that I agree with, that I think are inconsistent with the law as intended and as written. And so we're working through that. The time frame that we have is for, I think, a selection of somebody to manage and implement the program by the end of, testing my memory here, I think and Donnie might have to put something in the chat for me, she'll remember, but we're pushing the Office of the Chief Financial Officer to get things going. The fund is already established. So let's just be clear, the fund is already established, but families have not yet been notified yet because they have not selected someone who's going to manage the program. And so we're pushing them to do that. We passed it a couple of years ago. And so we need to get this thing going.
Sweet.
But it's still going to be a while before the first checks actually get cut. So, it is in the process of being implemented.
Well, and that's a good thing to note anyway. I mean, even if something like reparations were to be, or the bill that Councilman McDuffie is putting forward be passed tomorrow, this is still a lengthy process. And so that's why it requires such vigilance and like continuing to dig in and continuing to keep up.
And so can I just really quickly to the earlier question, just as baby bonds is one of many tools that, we have in our toolkit, reparations is not a panacea. It is one of many tools that the government should be intentional about legislating and implementing, designed to address the history that we have in our city that has kept Black folks on the bottom of the economic ladder. And while I am a capitalist, I do see the flaws in the system, and we also have to think about this as systems change, right? There is naturally a level of inertia that exists with changing any system. And when we think about economic mobility, I think about baby bonds, I think about reparations, I think about other things that we can do that are designed to provide economic opportunity to people, particularly those on the lowest ends of our socioeconomic ladder in the District of Columbia. So I just want to throw that out there as well.
Yes, my personal mission is to make sure no Black people are openly proudly capitalist, but it's okay. I'll put you in the program. We will transform you yet. I know there was a question that asked a little more specifically about what I meant in terms of real estate not being a viable wealth building strategy for Black people en masse. What I'm realizing maybe from this, and Brittany, maybe a thing that we can do is maybe collaborate on a teach-in or something. So be looking out for that, because it's a long answer, and actually we should struggle through it together. I don't want to just tell you the thing and be like, and now you should believe it. We actually should be in struggle to learn this thing. So we're coming up on our last question. So the last question, it's another one that really is probably for Councilmember McDuffie. There's this question about, the SNAP cliff is coming, this emergency SNAP is ending. And so there's this question of how do we reconcile like wanting to have programs like reparations and wanting to have these legislation that close the racial wealth gap while still having things that expand or increase the racial wealth gap, like people not being able to access the extra SNAP money after it ends, the elimination of public housing, like some of those sort of like bigger things. And anyone can answer this, but it was the person said it for you. But
let me make sure I understand the question, because I heard the SNAP clip, but then I heard you just mentioned something else about something ending.
Yeah.
Public housing?
No, well, the systemic elimination of public housing, I guess. But there's a question of like how do we reconcile having legislation that says let's close the racial wealth gap with these things while still having legislation or policies that do things that expand that gap?
Well, I mean, I think it's not either or. I think we got to do both, right? We can legislate to try to close the gap while also recognizing that there are laws in the books that have perpetuated the gap over the years, right? I think I mentioned systems earlier. I think it's important. Yeah, I've heard people say things like the District of Columbia, Black people are the ones who are making it worse because they're the ones running the government, right? Well, here's the reality. When we got limited home rule in 1974, we inherited the government, right? We inherited the system. And frankly, we've run it much in the same way it was run by, the white men who established it. And the result has been a perpetuation of existing disparities, in some cases, exacerbating existing disparities. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that there are laws in the books that may be perpetuating the racial wealth gap. Well, let's identify them and try to change them. At the same time, we can legislate around things like reparations, baby bonds, and other programs that allow people to access capital to start businesses in their neighborhoods, so they can hire people who live in their neighborhoods, so they can create that ecosystem that helps to chip away at ultimately the system that is, I think, deprived Black people of the same opportunities.
Thank you. And unfortunately, it is time for us to close. This was such a rich conversation. I'm going to actually turn it over to George Jones, our very cool CEO. Not many CEOs would allow this conversation to even go down. So George, would love for you to close us out.
Well, first of all, can I tell my kids you called me cool? They won't believe anybody said that. Hey, this has been a powerful conversation. Everybody who knows me knows I'm all about Black liberation. I'm all about Black reparations. I'm all about anti-racism. And we're going to push that agenda as long as Bread for the City, and as long as we got people like Aja and Brittany, and we've got allies like Kenyan and Temi. That's what we're all about. And I saw some questions that sort of asked implicitly, if you will, can this happen? And to paraphrase Dr. King, I do believe that we will overcome. We will do this. We will get this done. And I think we will get reparations done. We will get a whole organized community of folks who are committed to anti-racism. I really believe we'll do that. I believe we'll do that some of it in the coming years, some of it over the decade. And Bread for the City is committed to being a leader in this space. And we are so excited that we've got allies like those of you who joined this call to be a part of that that fight. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Aja, for your amazing facilitation. Thanks to our panelists.
Glad I paid you to say that. All right, y'all. So that's it. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And again, this is an ongoing conversation. There will be more conversations about reparations, about economic mobility, about this question of how we do this under capitalism, because it's important to say socialism is also imperfect. And yeah, let's talk. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep breaking bread. Thanks, y'all.